These days, work is in trouble. We've outsourced most of our manufacturing to other countries. And with that, we sent away good jobs and our capability to make things. American Giant is a clothing company that's pushing back against this tide. They make all kinds of high-quality clothing and activewear, like sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more, right here in the USA. So when you buy American Giant, you create jobs in towns and cities across the country. And jobs bring pride, purpose. They stitch people together. If all that sounds good to you, visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com with promo code STAPLE20.
If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge. From worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. I just want to let you know that our episode today is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. If you have not caught up on all the latest craze and you want to download the app, do so now when you use underdogfantasy.com/dominate. That's promo code DOMINATE to match your deposit up to $100, dollar for dollar. All the great best ball action and the easiest to use player prop betting app that you could possibly have on the market. Again, go to Underdog Fantasy and just use the promo code DOMINATE when you sign up today to get a match dollar for dollar up to $100 on your deposit. Thank you for supporting the show.
Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan Mader.
Last but not least, on Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, I got him at
Chris Dowhouse.
Get him, Chase. Get him, Chase.
And Adam LaRue.
No, not necessarily, but it's again the same.
Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
That's right. It's Thursday night. We're back. I know we're throwing you off by being one extra day, but you know, you'll live. The NFL draft is still a couple weeks away, and we're talking wide receivers tonight. And that's, look, I get it. The wide receivers loaded. I'm talking to these guys before it, and I could see 20 guys going in like the first 3 rounds. We don't have time in an hour to talk 20 guys. We're going to talk about the top 10 ECR guys and where we fall on that list. And to do that, I got everybody in the building. I'm your host, Dan Mader. Thanks for watching Operation Domination. Thanks for listening to Operation Domination. If you're coming across us for the first time, you can download us on your favorite podcast app or hit the little subscription and the bell notification so you get notified whenever we have new content available to you. But I also got my boys in the building. I got Chris D, Adam LaRue, Chase Thornton. Fellas, how we doing?
Yeah, a lot more tantalizing fruit on the vine than last week's show in terms of the quality of the candidates here. So I'm excited for it. Let's get
Chase,
going.
remind me never to hire you to like bring us up in the beginning of the show. Last week is like we started off with like the whole like, yeah, this is gonna be not great.
Yeah, listen, man. I don't mind this group of running backs, but the consensus that everybody seems to have. I was just reflecting the consensus.
I'm just busting your chops. Adam, how you been, man?
Dude, I'm so excited. This is a great group of receivers, and I mean, you've known me long enough. The receiver groups are always my favorite to watch, so this has been a fun little bit, kind of refreshing on the guys I hadn't watched in a little bit, pushing the list a little bit deeper. This is just such a fun group, dude. Like, I'm 35 guys deep that I feel like I've got a good grasp on, and there's still guys that I have on the list that I still want to watch. Like, it's a fun group.
Yeah, it beats the hell of it last year, right, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't necessarily nearly as exciting as a receiver core, but I was excited about Miles Boykin going to the Giants. I surprised didn't lead the show off with that, Dan.
There's always one little tidbit of wide receiver crap news we got to get to, but we do have something that's not crap. In fact, we have something that's fantastically great, which is a guest that we have to introduce. And the moment you've all been waiting for, at the top of your screen, from Fantasy Pros, one of the best experts in all of the industry, Mr. Pat Fitzmagic! Pat, what's going on, man? Thanks for joining.
Dan, thank you for having me back. Thanks for the great intro. Really glad to be here with you and Chase and Chris and Adam. Man, this is just a candy store of a wide receiver class. I think, last year we had maybe kind of heavy on some slot guys or whatever, but like there's everything in this class. Genuine guys with superstar potential, slot guys, fast guys, big contested catch guys, outside guys, like there's everything. So I could talk about this wide receiver class with you guys into the wee hours. I know we have an hour, so I'll shut up now so we can get started.
Yeah, there is so much to cover. Chris, I want to throw this out there because last year we had Pat on the show, and I think all of us were higher than consensus on Rashee Rice, and that panned out very, very well. Not so much lately in the news, but it did pan out for fantasy purposes last year. Just kind of wanted to throw that out into the wind.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
You did pretty good.
Yeah.
I think we did pretty good. We nailed that one.
Yes, we did. Here's how today's show is going to work. We're going to talk about our top three, right? Because it's the consensus top three. There's a couple of us that are a little bit different. We'll get into that in a second. But then just like last week, we're going to have our showdowns of the next 7 after that and where we stand on some of these guys. So buckle up your seatbelts. Let's get into the first guy. And the first guy, of course, has to be Marvin Harrison, who is the consensus wide receiver 1 as of this moment. Now, on the board, the only one of us that does not have Marvin Harrison number 1 is good old Adam, who's got him at number 2. So Adam, my question to you is this: why do you hate Marvin Harrison?
It's more a quirk of my process that I could have just artificially inflated him. But look, I had them as almost equals by them, Duns and Marvin Harrison Jr. And I had them as effectively equals. They're high up in my tier. This is very not me, being down on Harrison Jr. and probably being very high on O'Dunn's relative to consensus. They're both in my tier 1 of receivers over the last 3 years, as in Jamar, Drake London, and these two. That's end of the group for me. And look, draft capital is going to push him above O'Dunn's for me post-draft, so I just wasn't really freaking out that much that I didn't end up aligned pre-draft, because I don't draft pre-draft personally. So
Smart man.
I would never draft O'Dunn's over Marvin Harrison Jr., but I had them as really close, and I kind of wanted to give him credit in spirit.
You just want to be different for the sake of being different. That's fine. Pat, the thing about Marvin Harrison, I think there has been a push a little bit amongst people who are trying to seemingly, I don't know, they're just trying to be different or tearing him down a little bit. But when you look at Marvin Harrison, is there really any question in your mind that he should be the number 1 guy?
No. And living in Big Ten country and being exposed to his greatness pretty consistently and just being blown away every time I watched him play for the Buckeyes. The man obviously has good bloodlines, being the offspring of Marvin Harrison Sr., but this is not a dude who's just trying to coast on his name. He is reportedly just this tireless worker dedicated to his craft. And apparently when he was first brought NIL opportunities, he was disinterested because he just thought they were a distraction. And, maybe that comes from having a father who was a rich and successful NFL player, and he could afford to poo-poo NIL opportunities. But he is a worker. Maybe some people prefer the route running artistry of, one of the other top 2 receivers in this class. But I mean, he's really good at running routes too. He's physically able to dominate a lot of the guys he goes up against, and just phenomenal at the catch point. Absolutely phenomenal. Makes some great acrobatic catches and pretty good after the catch too. So really no holes in his game that I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, just for me, there's a lot of things he has you just can't teach. You can't teach the size that he has. You can't teach that background that he's getting from his father being a Hall of Fame wide receiver. So he has a big understanding coming into this thing, what the NFL life is even like to begin with. So he's ahead of the curve, I think, as far as maturity goes. He has the big body. He has the big catches. He has the work ethic. There's a lot of things in there you just can't teach that he has, and on top of having all the talent in the world. So I don't want to beat Marvin Harrison into I don't want to beat a dead horse here. But what I do want to do is I'll move to Malik Neighbors, who's been the consensus number 2. Now, somebody on this board, though, doesn't really feel that way, okay? And they have him really, really, really far down, all the way at their wide receiver 4. I know, I'm being a little sarcastic here. But, Chris, why is he outside your top 3? Because you got him at 4.
Yeah, I do. Unlike Adam, where I don't hate my own, I can't understand how Adam, a Colts fan, hates Marvin Harrison Jr. But I think for myself, what I'm seeing is Malik Neighbors has some flaws in his game that I think it's not going to translate as well in the pros. So I had some concerns about. I think Marvin Harrison is one of those guys who's going to be a beast. I think the Daisy, as we talked about, is going to be a guy who's going to be a really good player. It's about my 3rd player on the board. But why I have him so far down is I think he's definitely a slot receiver. It's a guy who had double-digit touchdowns for the first time last year. Is a guy that kind of struggles in contested situations, struggles getting off the press coverage. So I think he's definitely a guy who has explosive speed out of the slot position. But I question how effective that is going to be as a top 3 guy in the pros, where I think other guys are more safer guys.
Chase, do you see that the same way?
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, he's got room to improve. I don't know if he's as polished. He's definitely not as polished as Marvin Harrison. I don't think he's necessarily even as polished as Rome Odunze in a lot of ways, but I think he is capable of playing inside or outside. I think you can move him all over the field. He moved all over the field for LSU. If you look at his snap counts from last season, from the last couple of years,
he ran.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, he averaged about 7 yards per target on the outside. He was not effective on the outside. While he might have lined up there occasionally, that was not where he did his damage at. Where he did his damage was primarily in the slot, where he not lined up predominantly most of the time, and it was a lot of slot fades, a slot goes.
He might have done more of his damage in there, and you're correct on that. But I'm saying he can play in or outside, so you can move him everywhere when you get him up to the league there, especially if he goes to a team that maybe isn't set all the way on the outside. If he goes somewhere like New York, where they've already got 876 slot receivers, they could put him on the outside and he could help them right away out there. If he goes somewhere where they want to use him in the slot, they can use him there, but they don't have to, and they don't have to leave him there. I think he can play physical for those contested catches. I've seen him do it. He's got room for it. He's got room to improve that. He needs to polish his route running. None of those guys from LSU, they were all phenomenal receivers. None of them are really great route runners. They're not finished route runners, but he's got the skills. The skills are there for it, for him. And I mean, I see him as, he's not the clear number 2 over Rome Odunze that I think some people make him out to be, but I think that he's definitely, he's solidly in this top 3 tier. And I think he's solidly separated from his teammate, Brian Thomas, whom I love, and the rest of the guys in this class.
Well, that's a couple fair points there. And then we can see there is some debate a little bit between who the top guys are. Pat, I don't know about you, but I compared him, and this might be more in line with Chase's points. I compared him to a Garrett Wilson, who you kind of knew he could play inside and outside, did a lot of damage in the slot in college, but then was able to bounce out to the outside, of course, in New York, and do a lot of damage in the pros when given that opportunity. And I'll put this out there. Part of the reason I'm comparing him to Garrett Wilson is because I don't want to compare him to his teammate Jamar Chase, because I think that's a lazy comparison, and I look for other things. So that's part of the reason why I go Garrett Wilson. But Pat, when you see Malik Neighbors, what are you seeing there?
Mostly, I am seeing a guy who is absolutely extraordinary after the catch. Just completely exceptional in that area. And I think he's a pretty good route runner too. Maybe I like his route running a little more than Chase does. But yeah, he could certainly clean that up and then become just, one of the best at it. Maybe another Keenan Allen type, but with more speed is the nice thing. So maybe the only thing that scares me a little bit is, like, I feel the combination of route running and ability after the catch kind of reminds me of Jerry Jeudy coming out of college, and that didn't work out so well. I thought Jeudy was going to be great and, whiffed on that one. But I don't know. I mean, I know some people have Neighbors number 1. To me, he's kind of a pretty clear cut below Marvin Harrison, but I totally think he's worth a top 10 NFL draft pick.
You're tugging at my heartstrings with Jerry Jeudy, man. That hurt really bad. But I look at Malik Neighbors. As far as that goes, I do think he has more speed than Jeudy did coming out. So hopefully that's the saving grace for him. Moving on to our number 3 guy, or I should say consensus number 3 guy for the most part, Rome Odunze. Now you guys keep saying Odunze. I think all of us have pronounced it differently. Anybody got a consensus on the actual?
I think Odunze is correct.
Okay.
I didn't say that the first time, but I did.
Whatever Adam's pronunciation is what we're going with.
I'm locked in on the Washington guys with pronunciation. So
Yes, you are absolutely. Michael Penix.
Not to throw Chris here under the bus, but just a little bit behind the scenes in our Slack channel. Chris sends us our list, and every name is like misspelled. Like Chris have Tourette's when we went through this. This is hilarious.
Romy Adunzwai. Yeah, it's all good.
All right. Well,
He's still good no matter what you call him. A Rome by any other name.
He is. And Adam, you ranked him your number one. You touched on that a little bit. Care to elaborate?
yeah, so I just want to be crystal clear. So I do a numerical grade out of 100. The difference between the two is literally 0.03. Like when I say nearly identical, like I meant it and I just didn't care enough to switch him. So getting past that, the things that kind of pushed him over the top for me, I liked his route tree a little bit better. I think there are routes that Harrison does better, and I do think Harrison has a little bit more physicality off the press, but I think both of them get off the line really well. But I think the sheer number of routes that O'Dunn's runs at an NFL level is higher than any receiver in the last like handful of years that I've dove too deep into. I think that just the sheer number, again, like there are guys, London ran some of those interior routes a little bit better. I think there's some things on the outside that Harrison's done a little bit better, but as far as just sheer number of them, I think he does really, really well. The identity of this Washington offense was literally like, this dude's going to win every contested catch down the field. Like that's just how this offense was built. Like everything was secondary to that. I think that's certainly part of it. And I think it's easy to look at that and go, all right, well, he can't separate. Like he was just doing all these contested catches. But I think realistically, like watching the tape, when he's running, some breaking routes where he can get a chance to separate, he does. He is a technician when it comes to his route running. I just think he could get away with it in the Pac-12, to be honest with you. I mean, there were a lot of small corners where it was, look, like these are speedy guys, but if you give him a 50-50 ball with Rome Odunze, like he's going to win 75% of the time, as he did. So the separation thing doesn't bother me. I actually think he separates really well when that's kind of the intent of the route that's being ran. So I love him. This top three is fantastic, but he was the one that I was the most impressed with, kind of relative to what I'd been hearing kind of going in.
I mean, all three of these guys should go in the top 10. I'm with you there. And just to bolster your point, he was the number one receiver in contested catches in 2023. So yeah, that just kind of illustrates that further. This is a guy who can go up and get the ball. And being that he ran a 4.45, I'm not really too worried about him having enough speed to separate the next level either. So yeah, kind of put all of that to bed. Pat, what's your comments here? When he's your number three, how far of a gap is it between that top three tier and maybe the next guy?
Not that, the top three, pretty big drop off. I mean, I think there are some other guys worthy of going in the first round, but like this is three potential superstars, and I don't know if I'm ready to project superstar potential for any of the other guys. But yeah, like Adam nailed it with the contested catches really being the special sauce with Rome Odunze. I mean, like anything that's in his area code, he is coming down with. And you saw with Michael Penix just having incredible confidence that he could throw to a well-covered Odunze. And I'm not saying like he's not good at separating. He can do that. But like he was fearless about making anticipatory throws to Odunze and knowing that Odunze was going to come down with it. So like he is a special dude in that area for sure, and pretty good with the routes too and after the catch, so there's a lot to like with him.
Yeah, 100%. We actually got a little bit of breaking news coming in since we are talking about wide receivers anyway. Rashee Rice he turned himself into Dallas police. I just got that alert now, so I figured we'd keep you guys updated with that. Not going to dive into that. It's going to be a whole other. That could be an episode in of itself. Right? That's a whole other thing that we're gonna get into at a later date. For now, it's time to start doing some showdowns, because the next guy that we're going to talk about is Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors' teammate. And this guy is one of the big, electrifying freaks of this class, but maybe not as refined as the other top three that we were talking about. That's why Pat's alluding to maybe not on the same level when we get to these next guys. And speaking of Pat, he's going to be in on this debate. So let's get to it. All right, so this is going to be Chris versus Pat here. Chris has Brian Thomas ranked at wide receiver 7. Pat has him up at 4, and Chase is going to be the one who's going to decide who the winner is going to be. So, Chris, as the guy who has him ranked the lowest of the group, do you care to start first, sir?
Yeah, so first of all, I love Brian Thomas's talent. I love his skill set, and usually I'm a big fan of the guys who are 6'3" and run really fast. But Dan, I'm starting to come around on some of the things I'm seeing in the NFL and the coaching staffs that actually don't use these guys, and how often these guys are kind of forgotten about, become one-trick ponies who are just kind of used to clear out defenses, used for certain roles, aren't used in the slot where Brian Thomas was used in the slot, his previous year before his breakout year, and wasn't very good there. We saw Terrence Marshall kind of struggle in converting from the slot position as well. So Brian Thomas to me is definitely an outside X receiver. And as a guy who I love the skill set, but I just don't necessarily love where I see, most of the league opportunities for him to land. There are certain teams, if he lands the right spot, he will definitely jump on my board. Adam talked about is a lot like running back. And I feel like there's, going to be a lot where these guys kind of wind up being, where the draft capital is spent on them and where they kind of wind up fitting. But Brian Thomas, to me, is all a guy that if you're going to ask him to run the routes here and in college, there was 3. And a lot of those situations are going to be tough in the pros for him to continue to do that, just running those things, especially with his cover 3 defenses, which the league can't seem to figure out for some reason as part of the equation.
Okay. So you're blaming the league for Brian Thomas not being higher up on your list. Okay, that's an interesting little take there. Pat, what are you saying? You got him up at 4.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to wonder, I guess, how good Thomas is considering that he played with a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and also had Malik Neighbors on the other side. But I mean, it's funny, the last time I wondered about that with an LSU wide receiver, how good he was with a good quarterback and a great receiver on the other side. It was Justin Jefferson playing with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and that turned out pretty well for him in the NFL. So, I'm not saying Thomas is going to be the second coming of Justin Jefferson by any means, but there is a lot to like with that size speed combination and just that raw toolkit he brings with the big frame and the sub 4.4 speed. Pretty good at making tough contested catches. He's shown that. Scored 17 touchdowns in 13 games last year, so obviously knows his way into the end zone. But yeah, basically just I think he's capable of leveraging his athletic gifts. Maybe not a fully formed wide receiver yet, but man, if I got this guy and I was a wide receivers coach, I'd be pretty excited.
There's just nothing he can't do. So Chase, give me your take on Brian Thomas and then let me know which one of these gentlemen just won this debate.
Well, yeah, I'm higher on Brian Thomas than probably either of these, 2 gentlemen are, although my ranking aligns with Pat's. I really like Brian Thomas when I watch him on film. The thing I like most about him, I agree with Chris. I have in my notes, I literally have the phrase that you used, one-trick pony. Unfortunately, I don't think he was used in all that deep a route. He wasn't used in a very deep route tree at LSU. He ran a lot of deep ins and ran a lot of kind of going outside routes and just, run fast because you're fast and we'll chuck it to you. And so his route running isn't all that polished, but I think he has the skills there to be able to extend, the things that he does do. What I do like about him in his route running is that he presses his leverage well. He uses that speed. He's good at closing down the distance between and closing that cushion between himself and a cornerback, making that guy commit and then blowing by him either on the inside or the outside. I like that about him. And, he's got good instincts for that. He doesn't get off the ball quite as well as I'd like to see. Sometimes he takes too many choppy steps early on. And that's something, honestly, that I saw a lot with Malik Neighbors as well, trying to get off the line, is that they don't get off immediately. They kind of do these little shake things. So it makes me wonder if it's a coaching thing, a system thing, rather than a thing that's endemic to these two dudes. I think that, he can learn more deep. I think that he's got a great speed score. He's got a great size to speed ratio there. And he does need a little bit more physicality, but he can play with physicality. Like Pat said there, I'm inclined to give the win to Pat here. Chris, I know that last week you said the guest always wins. I don't necessarily always buy into that, but on this one, I'm much more in line with, I think, Pat's take on Brian Thomas. I think in a lot of other years, Brian Thomas would be a top wide receiver pick. Go ahead.
What's the last receiver with his similar skill set that you've seen do well in the pros in the last 4 or 5 drafts?
A guy that can run fast, run deep, and fight for the ball. George Pickens hasn't hit his. I don't think George Pickens has hit his stride yet, but I think he could have the same. I think he could do that.
Well, I'm going to, just to help Chris's point out here, I compared to Martavius Bryant. Now, hopefully he doesn't have the off-field issues that Martavius Bryant had. But to kind of
I think he's smarter than Martavius Bryant.
Yeah, but kind of point out, kind of what Chris is alluding here to a little bit, is that it's been a while since a big, tall receiver with explosive speed with not much of a route tree has been that successful. So just kind of, I will give him that one. But Chris, Chase said you lost. Wisconsin guys stick together, and then we got to move on. So that's just what we got to do. So Troy Franklin, he is up. And this one is actually going to be me versus Adam in this one. I got Troy Franklin at wide receiver 8. Adam's got him at wide receiver 11. And our guest Pat's going to tell us who's going to be the winner of this debate. Adam, I'll let you go first. Ladies first, as I always say.
Well, I thank you. Look, we don't have them super crazy far apart, so I'm not gonna, go too deep into this. I will say though, so how I tiered my receivers, I have my top 2, which is O'Dunn's and Harrison Jr., then Neighbors alone, then Thomas alone, then I have 5 to 10, and then my next tier after that starts with Troy Franklin. So I do probably have him a tier below consensus, even if ranking wise I'm not crazy far off. Long-winded way to get that, but so for me, I think he gets stuck at the top of his routes, especially against more physical corners. I think he gets out physicaled by corners his size or smaller on occasion. We saw that with Washington, which to be fair, he ended up redeeming himself quite a bit later in that game. So for me, and this harking back to Brian Thomas Jr., I think Brian Thomas Jr. has really good hips and really quick feet. And for Troy Franklin, who we're talking about a similar skill set in a lot of people's eyes, someone who is going to play on the outside, more of a flanker than an X, but play on the outside and go deep a lot. To me, he's more of a long stride than quick feet. I didn't necessarily, I wasn't super impressed with his hips, with his bend. I also was kind of concerned with his hands. I saw some focus drops. I saw some occasional questionable tracking, which for a guy, again, that's like the bread and butter was going deep. If you can't track the ball deep, then there's problems. And I saw him struggle to maintain through contact, catching the ball as well. Solid route tree, but far from a technician, kind of middle of the pack there for me. Saw some rounded routes, but some that are pretty good. He does run at an NFL level. And I think just for me, he's of the guys that I'm classifying as more of a flanker type receiver. I think he's on the low end as far as versatility. He's not a technician. There's a lot of flanker slot hybrid types in this class who I think can do both. And for me, it's strictly you're going to play Z and you're going to do nothing else. Especially from a fantasy perspective, I think his skill set isn't necessarily going to get a lot of targets. He might be a better NFL player than a fantasy person. He might be really good in best ball where he can have those blow up games, but I don't think he's going to consistently get a ton of targets. So he's not someone that I'm super high on from a fantasy perspective.
Well, here's where I will agree with you. Yes, he had a problem with drops. He had 9 drops last year. That was definitely an issue. And for his size, it was annoying to watch him at times have difficulty getting off the line of scrimmage versus press man coverage because he doesn't have quite the hand fighting skills you want to see. Doesn't use that big body that he has as much to kind of bully his way off the line of scrimmage when need be. So that's the parts where I do agree with you. But he's a deep threat. But what's more impressive to me about the fact that he was a deep threat and he was 8th in deep catches, 11th in deep yards last year. He had to play with the check down maestro in Bo Nix at quarterback. So for a receiver to actually be that proficient deep with a quarterback who doesn't really want to throw the ball all that deep all the time, that was pretty impressive to me. And that's how it shows you how open he was down the field. Now, I do have him a little bit lower consensus because the other thing I would like to point out, and kind of to your point a little bit, is that due to his size, you think he'd be a little bit better in contested catches, and he really was kind of more average in that space. But what does impress me about him is that anytime they needed a chain move, Troy Franklin got himself open. He knows how to get open. He knows how to hit those hitch routes and dig his hips in and explode back to the football. And that impressed me with a guy with his size. We talk about Brian Thomas. I think Brian Thomas is a more athletic freak. He's more electrifying than a Troy Franklin is, but Franklin is more polished as of this time when it comes to a full route tree as of this moment. And I do see a guy that he could play. I think he could play X in the wide receiver. I definitely agree with you. He'd be better as a Z, he'd be better as a flanker. That's one of the reasons I have him compared to a guy named Calvin Ridley, a guy who I don't think is ever going to be suited or ever would have been suited to be a number one anchor wide receiver, but a guy could be in a hell of a number two. And that's kind of why I'm looking at Troy Franklin here. And that's why I kind of have him coming in at wide receiver 8, a really good number 2 who can actually hit the deep ball with a 4.41 speed. So that's my piece. Pat, what's your take here on Troy Franklin? Who do you think wins this debate?
Oh man, this is really tough because like Adam sort of hit all the marks that I was thinking of. I have concerns about his ability to handle the physicality he's going to see in the NFL, not to mention those focus drops, like nine drops he was charged with last year. But boy, Dan, you countered that Bo Nix argument. That was compelling. Like, I hadn't really thought of that angle, and I'm like, ooh, he does have a point. Bo Nix is not exactly the most daring quarterback you're ever going to find, and yet Troy Franklin was routinely making big plays downfield. So, man, this is tough. I have to give the nod, I think, to Adam, just because, Dan, you couldn't quite push me off my position that I do have concerns about a guy who's 6'1.5" and was only 176 pounds at the combine. But that was a really close call.
Interesting to note that all five of us are actually lower than your highest, Dan, at 8, and his consensus is 5.
It's 5. Yeah.
I mean, we're all lower than him, all 5 of us. So I think we all share the same concerns. It's just Adam is much more concerned than you appear to be.
Yeah, and that's why I knew it was going to be a tough debate for me to win, because ultimately we all see the same kind of weaknesses going into this thing. But that's what makes this fun. We got more to come. I want to take a quick break. Right after this, we'll be back with 5 more receivers and 5 more debates, so don't go anywhere. Stay tuned on our channel. Hey there. Thank you for tuning into today's show. And if you want to show us some support, all you have to do is go to whatever podcast app that's your favorite and download the Operation Domination show. And when you do that, please leave us a 5-star review. And it really helps us out, shows your support. But also, when you leave us a review, it helps us better serve you. And we can make a show more curtailed to what you, the audience, wants, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, thanks for taking the time out. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, OP Domination on YouTube. And if you listen to us on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review. Or if you want, you can go to podchaser.com/podcast/Operation Domination below. That way, it's always in our bio and you can help support the show. Thank you very much. All right, we're back here. We got 5 more receivers to talk about, so let's dive into our top one here of the group, and that's Xavier Worthy, one of 2 Texas receivers that we'll be talking about tonight. But the big speedster, the guy who broke the record at a 4.21, absolutely impressive. So who's going to be arguing in this one? Adam, don't go anywhere, because now it's time to take on Chris. Chris has got him ranked as his wide receiver 6 right now. Adam's got him at wide receiver 10. Pat's going to tell us who wins and his take on Xavier Worthy. So, Adam, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, so I went through this at the beginning of the last one. He is in my 5 to 10 tier, so I do kind of think he can, depending on where he lands, move within there. And I think he is someone for me that the landing spot is going to make a great deal of importance. I think it's like him, a couple of these slot hybrid kind of guys, Keon Coleman are like the guys that, to me, like landing spot's going to be the most important. So for him, it's a lot of the same talking points as we just went through with Troy Franklin. Like, look, we're lacking physicality in every way. Like, we're not going to win against press with our hands or, really just any type of upper body strength. He can just outright beat someone off the line, and that's incredibly valid. But he doesn't do it all the time, including against guys that he's definitely quicker than and definitely faster than. In fairness, and I'm going to wrap back to this, that's a Texas issue, not necessarily a him issue. But so I'm concerned about him against press, that all having been said, and I'm concerned about him in contested catch situations. Now, how often is he going to be in them, given he's got the 4.2 speed? That's a fair argument, but look, I think we see some pretty freaking athletic defenders around the league right now, some rangy dudes running 4.3s, and with the advantage that they're starting in the spot that's closer to where he wants to go. So I don't think that's going to be the end all be all. Again, I think he can jump quite a bit for me. Here's the other piece for me. He's not a Tank Dell level technician, and I mentioned Tank Dell specifically because I think that they're compared a lot. I don't think that's the case on the release or as a route runner. I think he tries to separate with speed a lot more than he does with his routes. Now, look, if he's been kind of, winning or losing the speed battle, rather, he will resort to route running. And when he does, he's a damn good, crisp route runner. So I'm not trying to knock who he is as a route runner, rather that I think his go-to is let me run by you. And then if that doesn't work, I'll go run my routes, which I think is a bad habit. And that kind of brings me back to my issue with Texas. I don't know if their receiver coach is sleeping on the job or what, but I know that this is going to get brought up with the Donnie Mitchell, and I'm very glad that we're talking about Worthy first, because Donnie Mitchell gets hammered with it. Both of these dudes, if they're not the primary target, they're jogging off the line of scrimmage, through the routes. I don't know what's going on. And look, I don't want to hammer them for it, because that is a systemic Texas issue. It's through all of them. So to me, I don't want to hammer them for it, but I'm wondering if we're building a bad habit going into the league where that's definitely not going to fly. So all of those things having been said, I think if he goes somewhere with a high motion usage rate, he's going to be a damn good NFL wide receiver with that speed. But I don't think this is a guy who you can ever have go from static on the line to kind of going throughout his breaks and expect him to, get the separation that he can if you can kind of manufacture him space. So to me, it's all right, are you going to be the dude that I'm moving around? Because if he's the chess piece, he's the X factor, if he's the guy you're building your offense around as far as a receiver perspective, he's going to be incredibly impactful. I just don't know. He's very kind of dependent on that. I don't think he's, lining up as a flanker and just going from 0 to 100. I don't see it.
Okay. All right. Some interesting points there, Chris. Why is he your wide receiver 6?
Well, because I think he has versatility where he can line up. I think he can line up in the slot. I don't think he's going to be pigeonholed in just one route. I do think this is going to be a coaching thing, back to the Franklin versus Worthy thing, where I think people are going to know they're going to have to bunch Worthy. They're going to have to move him around. They're going to have to motion him. They're going to need more creativity, so to speak, used to get him involved. I also think that you see a guy who's not just fast, is quick. Quick and fast together is a problem a lot of times in the NFL. And you saw that after catches the ball, once the ball's in his hands, the size is a different story. Franklin isn't a guy, long strider, a guy getting down the field. Worthy can get down the field, but also a guy, once he catches the ball intermediate or short, he can make you miss. He can make a big play all that way. So I see a guy who has explosiveness all throughout and is willing to attack the ball. To me, I'm big on receivers who attack the ball. I think that's what separates you in the pros. Jahan Dotson was a guy, smaller guy, but attacked the ball. Xavier Worthy attacks the ball. And he has some drop issues as something that people are going to knock on him. But overall, when this guy's focused and you keep feeding the ball, around you a lot of Deshaun Jackson. And that's a guy I think could be very explosive, and a guy who's going to be at worst number 2 in somebody's offense, but could be somebody's top tier offensive guy down the road.
And Chris, no matter how this goes, we also have the same comp. I had Deshaun Jackson actually written down my notes as well, so I see it the same way you do. So, Pat, what's your take on Xavier Worthy and which one of these two gentlemen wins?
Yeah, so I think Chris hit on some of the marks that I don't know. He kind of got my sweet spot here with Xavier Worthy. So I think I have to give this one to him. Sorry, Adam. Two of the things, the way he attacks the ball and the Jahan Dotson thing, I kind of noticed that too. And Worthy, for a smaller guy, pretty fearless over the middle, actually. And like, even though he weighed in at 165 pounds at the combine, tough dude. 2 years ago, played through a broken hand. And like, it's not just the pure speed, it's the quickness too. I actually kind of like his releases, Adam. I don't know. I thought like that was something that kind of jumped out on tape to me a little bit, that I don't know, maybe I missed some of the ones that weren't quite as pretty, but I was watching mostly highlights, admittedly. So some of the things I saw were pretty impressive. Yeah, and this is just like, this is not a John Ross or a Philip Dorsett. Guy is about more than speed, and a guy who, when he showed up at Austin in his first year, had 62 catches for just under 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. So produced big time at a young age at Texas. I think he's about more than the speed, and even the speed, like, yeah, he set the record or whatever, but at 165 pounds, oddly enough, didn't even have the best speed score among the Texas wide receivers at the combine. So, he needs more to his game, and I think he has more to his game.
All right. Well, Adam, justice for beating me. Oh yes. All right. So we got Mr. Laddie McConkey. Laddie can do a little bit of everything coming out of Georgia here. And for this one, Chris, don't you go anywhere, because you're going to be taking on Chase right now. Because Chris, you got him ranked as your wide receiver 3. So he's got him in his elite tier. Chase is all in. Well, I shouldn't say all in the opposite ends. There's so many receivers this year, but he's got him all the way down at wide receiver 12, not even on the top 10 list. So I'm curious to see these guys duke it out a little bit. And of course, Pat will give us his take and let us know who wins this debate. So Chase at wide receiver 12. Why do you hate the little laddie?
Okay. You guys remember that scene in 8 Mile where Rabbit essentially wins his rap battle by coming out and telling the guy what he's already going to rip on him about? Allow me to rabbitize my Ladd McConkey take right here. Okay. My first note that I have on Ladd McConkey says literally a beautiful route runner. I love watching Ladd McConkey play football. He's intelligent. He was a finalist, I believe, for the Campbell Trophy, the academic Heisman, they call it, whatever. But he can run after the catch. He's a good punt returner. He's got yak ability there. He's a hands catcher. He's a plucker, like Steve Smith likes to say. He plays very well. And I think that Ladd McConkey, I said it last week though, Ladd McConkey strikes me as one of those dudes that I want on my real life football team. I'm just not sure that he has the fantasy ceiling or the fantasy value compared to a lot of other guys that I have ahead of him on this list. He's a very good football player, but his size, and as a small guy who played football and had to play the Ladd McConkey type game, I know how it is, but his size and his play strength are an issue in the league. I think he's going to be a very good player. Somebody's going to be very happy that they drafted him and very happy for what they can do for his team. In terms of him being a top fantasy value asset, I can nowhere near put him at number 3, and I know I'm lower than consensus on him, but I tend to see the other guys on my list as having much more of a ceiling, much more fantasy value, much more potential. And when I evaluate these guys, I'm not evaluating them as a draft pick in the NFL. I'm not evaluating them as a player on the roster as to what I think they can do in the type of career they can have in the league. I'm evaluating them based on what they're going to be able to do for my fantasy team. And I just don't see as much ceiling, as much value there as the other guys have, mostly because of his play strength and his size. He's got all the tools to be a very good player in this league for a very long time. If he plays all his cards right, goes to the right place, he could be a very fun to watch slot receiver. But, he is a little bit older compared to the rest of the top 10, top 12 consensus guys. Has never really had a breakout season in college, despite his skill set, despite how hard he plays, how intelligently he plays, and those kinds of things just worry me a bit. He didn't have an exceptional speed score, so even though he's small, even though he's fast, he should be fast because he's small, kind of thing. He's just, there's nothing that really wows me about him physically, and that's why I have him ranked so low.
As someone who's played flag football with you at the Fantasy Football Expo, you're a little smaller than Ladd McConkey. I'm just gonna,
I am 4 inches smaller than Ladd McConkey. I'm much smaller than Ladd McConkey. Actually, I'm about 5-6 inches smaller than Ladd McConkey. But I had to play the same kind of game. I had to earn every rep I got in practice, even not just on the field on game day.
Rudy.
Lad McConkey's a great player. He's a great player, not a great fantasy asset.
All right, well, let's see what Chris thinks. Chris got him at wide receiver 3, so clearly he thinks he's an elite rookie fantasy asset, quite frankly. So, Chris, what do you got here?
Yeah, so I wanted to hate on Lad McConkey. I think everybody on the show, outside Pat knows how I kind of roll usually with the receivers, especially guys who just get kind of hyped because they're the white receiver in the draft. I heard a lot of different comps for what this guy was going to be and what he's going to project to be in the pros. And one of the things that I see when I watch tape chase is I see a guy who's a technician. And he talked about what's going to be fantasy relevant. I drive this kind of point home again earlier about what you're seeing in the league. You're seeing a lot of teams run the Rams offense, the 49ers offense, where those guys like a Cooper Kupp, like a Patrick Nacua, like the guys, go through the list, Robert Woods, those guys who are the technicians who can run up inside or outside are invaluable. Pat talked about Justin Jefferson. Brian Thomas was just Jefferson in college. Justin Jefferson was a great route runner in college, in my opinion. And that's what I see a guy who can do. What people kind of question Justin Jefferson's athleticism, it wasn't a question, could he get the open and get the ball? And I think that's what I saw on tape. When I see guys, the production, you're right, Chase, but he went to Georgia. I mean, who are receiving is catching the ball a lot in Georgia as it is. Even the tight ends don't necessarily get the ball like they should. So I think that's partly the numbers aren't necessarily going to reflect. He was also injured this past year for part of the season as well. But when I look at a guy who I think projects very well into the system in today's NFL, we see all throughout, and a guy who I see a lot of different teams who can be a great player as their number 2 to start off with, that slot receiver who we know in half-point PPR, which is what we kind of keep score for this, our rankings here, that's very valuable. So I see a guy who's going to get 80, 90 catches probably pretty consistently because he can get open in the slot, but he can also line up on the outside. A guy that can do all the things that you kind of see the jet sweep actions and things that we see, Cooper Kupp action or Robert Woods, like I said, those guys are, the new wave in the sense of how the NFL is kind of statistically going. So for me, those guys who get open at intermediate and short routes, I think they're the guys I want to get my hands on.
Yeah, I just have to say this for me. When he ran a 4.39 40, that pretty much squashed any questions I had about his athleticism. So I just had to throw that in there. But Pat, what's your take here on Lad McConkey and which one of these two gentlemen wins?
Oh, you muted there, sir.
My
we want to hear this, Pat. We want to hear this.
Yeah, I mean, that was a tough one to judge because I feel like there's not a lot of separation with how all of us feel about the player. Like it seems like we're just kind of taking different methods to outline the overall take. And I guess I have to give the slight nod to Chase because I think he sort of did a really good job of articulating the way I feel about him. I like him a lot, but I do think there might be a ceiling on him for fantasy purposes. And that ceiling might be like the really good year and a half we got out of Hunter Renfrow a few years back. But like peak Hunter Renfrow was obviously valuable for fantasy. Just not a guy I think you're ever going to be going out over your skis to get in a draft, maybe.
Okay, so Chris, better luck next time, buddy. So now we got Adonai Mitchell. He's coming in here. So we got the other Texas wide receiver, the bigger, more physical wide receiver, but he's pretty fast in his own right. Ran a really nice 40 there, and just look, I have to put this out there. And I was talking to Chris about this, off air. Texas had a lot of skill guys. A lot. Like Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Jatavian Sanders, Jonathan Brooks before he got injured. And nobody was all that productive. So to Adam's point earlier, there's something wrong with that offensive scheme going on down there, that these guys couldn't be more productive when you have that kind of talent. But neither here nor there. For this one, Chris, Chase, you guys get to duke it out again. So we'll see if Chris can get redemption. Chris has got Adonai Mitchell down at wide receiver 9. Chase him as a wide receiver 5. Pat's going to let us know what he thinks and who is going to win this debate. So let's get to it. So Chris, as you have him wide receiver 9, what's the problem with Adonai Mitchell?
Yeah, so this is going to sound like a broken record, but it's similar to Thomas. I think these are guys who are kind of stuck on the outside. And I feel like when you have that guys who are stuck on the outside, you're looking for guys who can get you touchdowns primarily. Now you can get the big plays, and that's great for, for here and there and having some, best ball. But I think if you're looking for guys you want to have on your dynasty team, that you want guys who are going to be consistently productive. I worry Donnie Mitchell didn't show you that in Texas. And Dan, I'm with you. Steve Sarkisian did a horrible job getting the playmakers the ball in Texas. I think that's the problem. But I also think Donnie Mitchell is going to be a guy who's going to struggle to kind of find his role in the NFL. I see him getting kind of pigeonholed as a Gabe Davis type, and therefore you get to run like 2 or 3 routes. And if you don't get the primary read, you don't get moved around, you don't get lined up in the slot, you're going to see a lot of the top corners on the outside, and therefore that's what limits my upside. Now, you guys, this is really hard for me because I love physical talent, and I'm usually beating the drum on that kind of stuff. But watching how football is coached right now, I just don't see those guys being very effective because we see cover 3s take that away, and if you can't settle in the zone or find somewhere to get open, guys kind of forget about you and they replace you. It's also not a blocker. As a lot of times you're not going to get in the field because you don't block as that second receiver on the field right now. So there's a lot of things for me. I love Donnie Mitchell's talent. Dan talked about it. I was talking about off air. I think this guy could be an absolute stud. When you see him, you're like, wow, how does this guy do all the things he can do? But then you look at the numbers and you're like, well, how they don't kind of add up. But I do think he can be very productive. And this is a guy Adam keeps talking about that can definitely move up my board depending on where he goes. This is based off of the idea that there's not a lot of teams that he's going to be successful as well on as other teams.
Okay, so Chris again blaming the rest of the NFL, and you know what? It's the side effects of I think of PPR becoming the most dominant thing out there. I mean, there's halfway PPR and PPR. Very few people are playing standard leagues anymore, and it does curtail to these guys who get volume, not necessarily as many big plays and touchdowns. And that's what the best ball I think is kind of taken over in that standpoint for. Just a little comments there, but Chase, you have them much higher. So why do you love Adonai Mitchell?
Again, I'm going for that fantasy ceiling that I see a guy can have. And when I look at his situation, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Steve Sarkisian and what they did to get their playmakers the ball. But I'm an even smaller fan, I guess you could say, of Quinn Ewers getting his playmakers the damn ball. I'm not sure Quinn could hit me from the other side of the bar here consistently. Okay. When I look at Adonai Mitchell on tape, he has a very plus catch radius, in my opinion. He had 1 drop in the last 2 seasons, 1 drop. And that was this past year, but in the past 2 seasons, 1 drop. That's pretty phenomenal. That's borderline superhuman when Quinn Ewers was the guy throwing the ball. He didn't get a lot of in-frame catches. He had to reach outside his frame a lot. He's got the hands to make those difficult catches. That being said, he does probably catch a little bit too much with his gut, when I'd like to see him catch more with his hands. But again, I think if he's getting more on the money throws from a guy in the NFL, which I don't think Quinn Ewers is an NFL level passer, not yet. I think he'll perform much better that way. He's 6'2", he's 205. He had a great speed score. He's faster he's fast as all heck. I would like to see him run his routes a little more similar to what I talked about earlier with Brian Thomas, where I'd like to see him press that leverage better with that speed he's got. If he presses that, closes that down, and forces that issue with cornerbacks better, I think that he can be a better route runner. I think you can coach him into being a better route runner. I'd like to see a little more physicality with him to pair with the phenomenal body control that I see on film with him and the explosiveness that I see with him on tape. I love him after the catch. He's tough after the catch. But again, he didn't necessarily get to show that as much as he could have had he been getting the ball in his frame and on schedule the way that I think other quarterbacks will be able to get him the ball. I like the package, the overall, I love him on paper, and what I see on film, I think can translate to the league. And I think you can coach him up on any deficiencies that you might've brought up there, Chris. So I really like Adonai Mitchell for his fantasy potential.
Makes me wonder, how good can Archie Manning really be? Because he couldn't take over the year.
Right.
Automatically bowing down to the Mannings. I'm just saying.
That's another whole.
Neither here nor there. Pat, so what's your take here on Adonai, and which one of these two gentlemen wins?
Yeah, just a real quick aside. One of the guys I do the Fantasy Pros Dynasty podcast with, Scott Bogman, big University of Texas fan. Can't wait to tell him to watch this show, and so he'll get to listen to everyone crap on Steve Sarkisian and Quinn Ewers. So gonna enjoy that. But AD Mitchell has like that great size speed combo like Brian Thomas, and tough, confident kid with the knack for making the big catch. But I do have to concede to Chris, and I think he maybe got this right as far as the key concern with Brian Thomas too. Unless he can really ratchet up the route running prowess in the NFL, maybe he is going to be that Gabe Davis type one-trick pony, and that's a problem with all the the way the coverage schemes have been going in the NFL and playing the cover three and taking away those big plays. So I'm going to give this one to Chris because I do think he makes a really valid point on that.
Chase, you couldn't handle the race car in Chris's background. That was.
I was distracted. I was throwing off my game. Damn it.
All right, so we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. We got two more guys to talk about. This guy out of Florida State is a big-bodied guy, and he really came on strong in his senior year at Florida State. So this is going to be an interesting debate. We got Pat and Adam in this one, and I'm going to decide who the winner of this debate is going to be. Pat's got him at wide receiver 5, and Adam absolutely hates Keon Coleman. So let's see what we got here. I mean, Adam, what did Keon Coleman do to you? I mean, for 19.
Show us on the doll where
as I mentioned with Xavier Worthy, he's one of those guys who the landing spot matters the most for me. He could jump as high as 11 for me. I do have him at 19 currently, but he could jump all the way up to 11. He can flip the tier if he wants to. Not if he wants to. It's not up to him. What it's up to is, look, I don't think this man can play a lick on the outside at all. Like, I think he is only a slot. I think that we are looking at someone similar to Mingo, but also similar to potentially Jordan Matthews. I think you can kind of live, you can do the power slot thing, and I think that's valid. I think he has really strong hands, and I think he has a really good understanding of zone coverage. For someone his size, you should be way better on your release, dude. You can't be pressed to save your life. Like, it's bad. So for me, like, I think he can do some of the in-breaking routes really well. So again, I think if he gets that opportunity, then I'm all on board. And actually, I think he can have really high fantasy upside there as a, someone in a role. I don't think he's as talented, but in a role similar to what Puka got at the beginning of last year, or a role similar to what Amon-Ra St. Brown has dominated in recently, I think he can do those things really well. But I have concerns if someone tries to play him as a flanker, God forbid an X, that he's going to be something like Devontae Parker, and not young Devontae Parker, or like Chark, and not young Chark, but like the Devontae Parker and Chark that we saw last year. Like the guy that runs deep on the outside and can't separate from anything. I don't see someone that's going to separate much, but I do see someone that on the interior can win contested catches. So he's super, super role specific for me. He can go on either end of the tier, kind of like I mentioned. I think that's most of it. Look, I guess the other thing that I'll give him as a positive is I think if you do get him short, like on a drag route, you let him get ahead of steam, you let him build his momentum, because he doesn't have quick burst either. This isn't one of those guys that like bursts quick but doesn't have the long speed. Me has neither. But if you do let him get that head of speed, I do think he becomes a bowling ball after the catch. So that kind of points more towards that power slot. Like if you get him the ball short, let him run a drag, let him run a slant, he can catch the ball and turn into a runner really quick and run with power. So I'm just very role dependent on him, and I'm concerned that he's going to get pigeonholed into being something that he's not, because we've seen it a lot with guys with similar profiles.
Okay, so Adam's saying he needs to get to a buffet and become a tight end immediately. So, Pat, why do you have him at wide receiver 5?
Oh, man, I do think he's going to be able to play on the outside, although I do like him maybe most as a big slot. But it was funny. I was just talking to Matt Waldman about Keon Coleman, and he kind of echoed something that Adam said. Like, he thinks landing spot's going to be key for him because he is a guy who needs to go with a guy who's an anticipatory thrower, because Coleman is never going to be an elite separator, just doesn't have the speed. And although, Waldman thinks he's an underrated route runner, he is sort of the same phylum, I think, as like Des Bryant, Mike Evans, guys who are not big separators, and they're not going to be big yak guys, but they're going to be big air yards guys because they are rebounders. And, in fact, this guy played college basketball at Michigan State for Tom Izzo. He averaged 30.8 points a game as a senior in high school. Keon Coleman is a big rebounder, and I don't think Adam really mentioned that he is maybe the best in the class as far as acrobatic catches. just his wingspan and the reach he's able to do and contested catches. Like, he is absolutely extraordinary in that area. And like, that is where he is going to make his money in the NFL. So I'm convinced he can do that. And even though he's not super fast, the 4.640 time, I mean, he did hit the highest top speed in the gauntlet drill, going over 20 some miles an hour, and looked really smooth doing that drill too. I like him a lot. I'm really excited about him. And I'd kind of like to see Buffalo grab him at the end of the first round if they stay put.
Okay, well, I actually have him at wide receiver 9, so I'm kind of in between Pat and Adam to some degree here. Adam, you might not like this, but my comp for Keon Coleman is Michael Pittman, because yes, I could see him being more of a big slot guy, not necessarily a guy who's going to take you down deep, but Pat alluded to this. He's a smooth athlete. He's going to be excellent in the red zone. He's going to be excellent for moving the chains. Now, to your point, do I think he's going to be the anchor? Michael Pittman was able to turn himself into one, but it also helped that he landed into a situation where they needed to build around him. So yes, to that point, I understand that. But the 4.61 thing, it doesn't bother me when guys understand how to change speed. And that's what Keon Coleman knows how to do when he's running in and out of his routes. He's got great hips for being a taller wide receiver. And I'm going to throw this out there too, because this is something that's going to keep popping up throughout the NFL draft in general. He's 21. There's a lot of guys in this draft are 23, 24 years old. He's actually one of the few guys who are on the younger side, which I like there too. I'm going to go with Pat here as far as winning on this one. Feel more closer to his size. Sorry, Adam. Better luck next time. Don't worry, Adam. You're going to get another crack here, though, because we got Roman Wilson up to bat. And this is going to be between you and Chris, the guy from Michigan. He's ECR wide receiver 10. This is going to be interesting. And Pat's going to tell us what he thinks about Roman Wilson and who's going to win this thing. So let's get to it. All right, so this is actually a guy Adam loves. We finally found somebody that Adam loves. We've been talking about all the guys he hates all night. He's finally got someone he loves. He got him at wide receiver 6, and then Chris is the one who's not such a fan at wide receiver 14, not even in on his top 10 list. So, Chris, explain to me why Roman Wilson's all the way down your wide receiver 14.
I just don't see it, Dan. I know this isn't general for Michigan in general. I think there's just this love for Michigan because they won the championship this year. The quarterback's awesome, even though he doesn't throw the ball ever. The receivers are awesome, even though they catch the ball ever. Wilson's a good player. He's quick. He can get in and out in the slot. He's only a slot receiver. There's nothing that jumps out to me, does anything special. I've seen a dime a dozen of these guys. He's Sky Moore to me. He's those Tolbert. Go down the list. He's those guys who are going to be out there, runs about 5'11", 6 foot, kind of quick, but doesn't really get great separation. He's physical in the sense that he's willing to block, but he's really small. So do they really want him out there blocking? Is he going to attack the ball? He's okay. He's decent when he gets the ball, manufactured in his hands. He can make different things happen. But we see a lot of those guys just aren't really utilized. Everybody wants to be the next Deebo Samuel. There's only a certain amount of Deebos. Now, where I will give Adam some leeway is I wasn't a big Reed fan last year. And I saw how the Green Bay kind of used him, and I've seen very similar profiles that this is guys that profiles a lot like Reed did last year. And if they utilize him in that role, possibly he can be higher up my board. But other than that, Adam, I just don't see an offense to trying to figure out how to get this guy the ball.
All right, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll start with what really drew me in, and it's kind of what he does away from the ball, and I'll get back to what he does with the ball because I like that as well quite a bit. Obviously, I do have him pretty high above consensus. But dude, this is like the anti that Texas wide receiver thing that I was complaining about. He's the polar opposite. This dude might run his routes harder if he's lower on the progression. Like he's just such a freaking football dude. He played games with a broken arm last year. That was just like so impressive to me as a receiver to do that. Play with a cast feels a little strange, but I don't know how Harbaugh let him do that, but I digress. And speaking of Harbaugh, look, this is it gets called a pro style offense. And I get if you're just going to use common labels to call it a pro style offense because it's the closest normal person label. But this is like a pro style offense as if you stopped watching the NFL in like 1993. So, look, the percentage of the passing game that he got was pretty dang good. I like what he does as far as the little things. Like I said, away from the ball, he runs his routes really well. He is a willing run blocker. And I think where you and I disagree is play strength as a receiver. I don't think he's, I don't disagree as far as like getting off the line, that type of play strength. But this dude made crazy contested catches, especially down that stretch. I mean, if you want to talk about a guy who time and time again was bailing JJ McCarthy out, he might be like the single guy that is most responsible for winning the Ohio State game, in my opinion. Like, he was making some crazy contested catches. This dude will like runs his butt off on third down every single time. And I think that he's the type of guy that is just going to end up in his quarterback's good graces because, look, he's not quite the technician as a route runner that Ladd McConkey is yet, but I think he's got the hips to become that. I think he's got very fast feet. And I think he's got the work ethic, dude. And I know that's hard to project. I haven't met the guy, but there's nobody in this class his size that is running routes the way he is, away from the ball, that is trying to run block at his size, getting graded, but doing it anyways, that is going up the middle, getting hammered by Big Ten safeties and Big Ten linebackers, and comes down with the ball every freaking time. So,
you're describing the receiver that was for the 49ers, got drafted by the 49ers last year from Michigan. But go ahead, sorry.
Who got drafted in the 7th round? That's what you're alluding to, Ronnie Bell there.
Yes.
I like him quite a bit. And look, he is a pretty good athlete. I mean, we talked about, feeling confident in the athlete that Ladd McConkey was with the 4.39. I mean, Roman Wilson was right there, almost identical in a lot of those testing attributes. So I think he is someone that day one I would want in the slot. I would never want him as an X, but I do think he could eventually develop into one of the smaller guys that can work as a flanker type. You don't want that to be his primary role, but I think like a 30% of his snaps, I think he can manage on the outside, something like that. So I like him quite a bit. I think he's a tough player.
All right. Well, we got two compelling arguments. Pat, I want your take on Roman Wilson, and then which one you agree with more.
Yeah, two very compelling arguments. You've got Chris and Adam in this tug of war, and I feel like I'm getting tugged back and forth too, because I know two guys I work with like him a lot, Thor Nystrom and Derek Brown, and I was just talking to Matt Waldman, and he's got some issues with Roman Wilson's technical, like his route running thing, says he gives up his leverage all too willingly in kind of dumb ways sometimes when he's running his route. But, man, so I see a guy who's going to be primarily a slot receiver, has that good speed, but man, like the fearlessness, he is not afraid to go over the middle. And as Adam pointed out, like he just balled out in that Ohio State game. So I'm going to give Adam a slight nod on this one, although Chris made some really good points too. Really close call here.
It's a tough one, Chris. It's a tough one. It's all right, though. We all got to lose sometime. Pat, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show, man. I want you to plug, not that anybody doesn't know who you are anyway, but I want you to plug yourself, what you got coming up. What can we look forward to?
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. This was a blast, and this was, even more fun than last year because we had a better class to talk about this time. So, please check out fantasypros.com. Of course, we're going to be hitting the draft pretty hard in the next couple of weeks, and check out the Fantasy Pros Dynasty podcast, where we will also be hitting the draft pretty hard. Got Matt Waldman on as a guest this week, Thor Nystrom next week. So, all prospect talk there, and people can find me on Twitter at @Fitz_FF.
Excellent. Just again, thank you so much for coming on. Love having you here. As for this crew, we'll be back next week to talk about tight ends. We're going to be goofing off in that episode a little bit. I'm FYI, there's only like 5 tight ends that even worth talking about. So we're going to have a little distractions in there. I promise you that. But make sure you're following us at Operation Domination on our YouTube channel. Subscribe. Hit us up on your favorite podcast app. We're available to you wherever you want to go. We are going to be doing our live draft show live from Charlotte. We'll be at one of the top bars in the area. We'll be disclosing that soon as far as the actual location goes. Let you guys all know that, and we'll be streaming it live everywhere. So we're very excited about that. You can catch my articles on Fantasy Football Advice Network when you go to fantasysportsadvice.com. I already have the quarterbacks and the running backs of this class. I'll be publishing 2 receivers because there's 20 receivers. 25 receivers actually I want to talk about. I'll be publishing 2 of those next week. So make sure you tune in for that. You can find me at Dan Mater FF. Adam Chase, real quick, where can they find you?
Find me at STT Chase FFB on X, Twitter, whatever you still call it there. I'll be giving my takes on, everything that pops up, including Rashee Rice, if we get more news. So find us there.
Yeah. On the screen at LaRue Adam. You'll figure it out. I believe in you.
Chris, you can find him at Operation Domination FF, our head guy for our actual account media for the show. So guys, we'll see you again next week. Everyone take care and have a great weekend.